Hey guys, today I'm working on Easter card number 3 and I've pulled out my Big Shot because I'm going to die cut the front panel of this card. It's only one piece on this actual card that's die cut, and I'm using the largest frame from the Avery Elle Finished Frames die set. It's a die set that actually comes with a lot of little pieces in it, a lot of little stars and hearts and bows, but I'm using the largest frame to cut this piece of watercolor paper that's going to be the front panel of my card. I'm prepping the surface because I'm going to do some stamping and heat embossing. So I pulled out my MISTI tool and I'm using a stamp set from Inka Dinka Doo. I believe it's called Spiritual Sketches. And I'm going to stamp the cross and a sentiment that says rejoice on the front of this card in Versamark ink. The stamp set that I have is an older acrylic stamp set, so I was actually concerned that I wasn't going to get a good impression initially when I stamped it down, but using the MISTI tool allowed me to get a pretty clear impression using a stamp set that is not photopolymer. So you can see here when I put the embossing powder on that the image stamps pretty clearly. I'm going to color this image using some watercolor markers. And I learned from a previous card that these particular markers work better on a wet surface. So I'm wetting the cardstock, or the watercolor paper I should say, and letting the water soak in before I begin the coloring process. Now I started off with a gray marker to kind of dull the brown color that I'm using from this particular watercolor set. Unfortunately, I won't be able to tell you any of the names of the colors because they're actually printed on the marker barrel in Japanese. But after I colored, or I laid down an initial layer of color, I'm going back in with an aqua brush and spreading the ink out. One of the things that I really like about these markers is that you can get into some very small spaces using them. They have a very fine tip, and if you just place that tip against the paper, the color just kind of drops into the paper. It soaks it up very quickly, so it makes it really easy to get into nooks and crannies without feeling like you have to go out of the lines. There are a few sections where I put down too much water, so I'm taking the tip of a paper towel and just soaking that water up. I'm also using the paper towel to remove a little bit of the color where it's a little too saturated. And every time I change colors, I go to a new part of the paper towel so I don't cross the colors into each other. While that front panel dries, I'm going to stamp the inside of my card using a sentiment and the same cross stamp that I used for the front panel. I'm inking up the stamp in Crumb Cake ink, and I'm going to stamp it off onto a scrap sheet of paper and then stamp the lighter color, or the second imprint, on the actual inside of the card. Now for the sentiment, I'm going to use Versamark ink and emboss it using the same gold powder that I used on the front portion of the card. To cover the background of the front of the card, I'm using a piece of wood grain paper from this 6x6 DIY paper pad from American Crafts, and I'm just going to trim it down to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 and adhere it down to cover the entire front portion of the card. Once that front panel is completely dry, I'm going to attach it to the front of the card using a lot of dimensional adhesive because the cardstock is slightly warped. And that completes my card. Here's a look at the final product. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.